The dog arrived on a Tuesday morning, the way trouble usually did in Harding County, without warning and without any particular regard for who it inconvenienced. Gunnery Sergeant Decker Hale had pulled his truck off Route 9 to check a rattling bracket on the trailer hitch when he first saw the animal, a lean shepherd mixed with a torn ear and dried mud caked into the fur along its flank, sitting at the gravel shoulder about 30 yards ahead of him, watching him with the calm of something that had decided where it was going and was simply waiting for the right moment to continue. He straightened up and studied it. Bram, his German shepherd, was already standing at the passenger window with both ears raised, tracking the animal with the precise attention of a dog who had not decided anything yet. Decker did not call to the stray. He had learned over years of working dogs in conditions far less forgiving than a county road in Virginia that a dog showing that kind of stillness was either very dangerous or very tired, and either way you did not rush it. He walked slowly to the passenger side and let Bram out, and the two of them stood at the shoulder while the stray watched them from 30 yards of distance. Bram did not growl. He did not lunge. He took 2 deliberate steps forward and sat down in the gravel, and that, as far as Decker was concerned, was a recommendation. He drove the rest of the way to Harding with the stray in the truck bed, wrapped in the wool blanket he kept behind the seat. If you feel this story pulling at something you have carried a long time, stay with it. Subscribe if you have not yet, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss one. Decker Hale was 39 years old and had been out of the Marine Corps for 14 months, which meant he had been out long enough to stop waking up at 4 in the morning from the habit, but not long enough to stop waking up at 4 in the morning from everything else. He was 6 feet and 2 inches tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that had less to do with the gym than with 20 years of carrying weight that was not always his own, and his hair was close-cropped and dark with the first threads of gray at his temples. A scar ran along his left jawline from a piece of vehicle glass in a place he did not talk about, and his hands were the hands of a man who had worked with them his whole life, knuckled and rough across the backs, still steady. His eyes were the color of deep water before a storm, and they moved the way the eyes of people who have spent serious time in serious places always move, cataloging exits, reading body language, measuring distance, never fully at rest even when the face above them was calm. He had come back to Harding County because his mother had left him a house when she died 8 months ago, and because he had nowhere else to be. The house was a 2-bedroom frame farmhouse on 11 acres at the end of Piney Church Road, behind a row of white oak trees that were now enormous and half wild and dropping branches every time the wind picked up. He had been working on it steadily since his arrival 6 weeks ago, methodically, starting at the structurally critical and working toward the cosmetic. He was not happy here. He was not unhappy. He was present, which was something, and he was useful, which was more. The stray presented its first problem that Tuesday afternoon, when Decker realized it was not a stray. He had set it up in the barn with water and food, and while it ate, he examined it the way he had been trained to examine things, with patience and a systematic eye. The torn ear was old, the edges fully healed. The mud was recent, but the animal beneath it was well-muscled and clean-coated, which meant it had been feeding regularly until recently, and around its neck, mostly hidden by the thick fur at its ruff, was a collar, old brown leather worn almost to softness, with a single brass tag bearing a phone number and a name, Garrison. He tried the number twice that evening and got no answer. The town of Harding was not large enough to have its own newspaper, but it had a hardware store, a diner, a farm supply, a 2-bay mechanics shop, and a post office. And in Decker's experience, those 5 things constituted a complete intelligence network for any rural community. He drove in the next morning and, while settling up for deck screws, asked the woman at the register, a broad-shouldered woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back and the no-nonsense expression of someone who had heard everything and classified most of it as not her problem, whether she knew anyone named Garrison out on the county roads. She looked at him for a moment in a way that suggested the question carried more weight than he had understood it to. "That would be Harold Garrison," she said. "Out on the mill road." She paused. "Harold has been looking for that dog for 11 days. Harold Garrison was 73 years old, and Decker got his address from the woman, June Parr, and drove out that afternoon with the dog in the truck bed. The house on the mill road was a white clapboard farmhouse with a covered porch, a barn older than the house and leaning slightly west, and a yard that had been tended carefully once and was now tended carefully still, though the hands doing the tending were clearly moving slower than they used to. Harold came out onto the porch before Decker had finished shutting the truck door. He was a tall man, though age had taken some of that height and redistributed it into a slight forward curve of the upper spine, the posture of decades spent bending over work. His face had once been strongly square and was now square with the added complexity of deep weathering at the corners of his eyes and across the forehead, like good wood left in the elements for a long time. His hair was white and cut close. His hands on the porch railing were large and scarred in the specific way of a man who had worked with tools most of his life, and his expression as he looked at the truck was the expression of a man bracing to hear something he had been afraid to ask. Then the dog appeared over the side of the truck bed, and Harold Garrison said nothing at all. He came down the porch steps, and by the time Decker got the tailgate down, the old man was already at the back of the truck with both hands on the dog's face, speaking in a low murmur, not meant to be heard, and Hector was pressing into him with the full weight of a dog who had been searching for a specific human for 11 days and had at last found him. Decker stood back and gave them the space. After a long moment, Harold looked up. His eyes were wet at the edges, and he made no effort to conceal it, which Decker noted as the mark of a man who had decided that certain kinds of feeling did not require hiding. "I didn't think I was going to get him back," Harold said. His voice was low and steady, a quiet voice that had once been bigger. "You're the one staying at the Hale place," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir." "Marion's boy?" The pressure in his chest tightened unexpectedly. "That's right." "Your mother was a good woman," Harold said. "She brought food here when Dorothy's heart started giving her trouble. Did it more than once, and didn't make a production of it." He paused. "You look like her, around the eyes." That hit him harder than he expected. He stayed for coffee. He had not intended to stay, had intended to hand over the dog and return to Piney Church Road and the gutters that still needed finishing. But Harold had asked, and Decker had found himself unable to locate any reasonable objection. Bram and Hector settled on the porch together while the two men sat at the kitchen table, and Decker noticed that Bram, who was not a dog who relaxed easily in unfamiliar spaces, had arranged himself with his shoulder pressed against Hector's. Bram reserved that gesture for situations he had decided were safe. The kitchen was clean and spare, organized with the meticulous tidiness of someone living alone who had kept good habits from a time when the household was larger. There was a wedding photograph on the wall beside the window, a younger Harold and a small, bright-faced woman with dark hair, and beside it the same woman at some summer celebration, laughing at something outside the frame. There were no recent photographs of her. They talked easily. Harold had spent 31 years as a millwright before the plant closures in the late 90s, and after that had turned to repair work and cabinet making, applying machine skills to things small enough to do alone. As Decker stood to go, he looked at the front porch steps. "The bottom two need new stringers," he said. "You've got settling in the left side that's going to pull the tread loose in the spring. I can bring timber and do those in a couple of hours." Harold looked at him steadily. "I was going to get to it," he said. "I know," Decker said. "I'm offering because it's the kind of job that goes faster with two sets of hands." There was a pause, the private calculation of a man who did not accept help easily. "All right," Harold said. "Saturday morning." Decker drove back to Piney Church Road and did not let himself examine too closely why he had made the offer. Saturday morning arrived cold and clear. They worked through the morning without unnecessary conversation, which was the best kind of working company, and Harold knew his way around timber, knew when to hold a board and when to let it go, knew the difference between a nail set right and a nail set wrong by the sound. The slight curve of the old man's spine did not translate into diminished capability. It translated into someone who had found the posture that conserved energy across a long day's work, the posture of a craftsman. By noon, the two treads were in, and the porch felt solid underfoot again. Harold tested it, pressing his full weight onto the bottom step and nodding once with the satisfaction of a man who understood what a solid thing felt like. He stayed for lunch, and Harold made soup from a pot he had started the day before, thick with root vegetables, the kitchen smelling of bay leaf and something roasted and slow. He ate more of it than he intended to because it was, in fact, excellent soup, the kind that had been thought about rather than thrown together. Outside on the porch, Bram and Hector moved about with the low, companionable ease of dogs who have decided they understand each other and have no further business to settle. "Dorothy made that recipe," Harold said when Decker finished a second bowl and sat back. "I had to learn it from a notebook she kept. Took me 4 tries to get the proportion right on the time. She wrote the amounts down but not the order, and the order turns out to matter." He looked at the bowl for a moment in the way of a man looking at something that contains more than what is visible. She would have been 70 this spring. Heart failure. 3 years ago, come February. The house was different after. A pause. "I don't mean the house itself. I mean the way it felt inside it." Decker understood this better than Harold could have known. He started coming out on Saturdays. He had not made a conscious decision to do this. It happened the way certain things happen to Decker Hale, incrementally, one Saturday leading to the next, each visit finding some task close enough to finish to complete, and another that would take 2 sets of hands. He repaired the barn door hinges. He helped Harold replace a section of water line to the barn that had developed a pinhole leak. He helped clear the back fence line of storm-down growth that had let Hector escape, and they rebuilt that section properly. Posts set in concrete, wires stretched tight. Harold insisted on reciprocity in the form of the soup pot, or a loaf of bread he baked, with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. And Decker stopped declining these things after the 3rd visit, because declining them was clearly causing Harold more inconvenience than accepting them. Bram's behavior at the Mill Road house was, for Decker, the most reliable gauge of what was happening there. The dog had gone from alert and cataloging on the 1st visit to settled and trusting by the 4th, faster than Bram moved toward most people in the 14 months since Decker's discharge. He had stopped watching the fence line on arrival and started going directly to the porch to find Hector. It was on the 5th Saturday, a cold December morning with the first snow of the year coming down in earnest, that Decker met Dorothy's sister. Her name was Vera Moss. She was 68 years old, 5 feet and 4 inches, slight in the way of women who had always been slight, with the dark hair gone almost fully silver, and the bright, alert eyes of someone who paid close attention to things and had long since stopped apologizing for it. She saw Decker before she said anything to Harold, and her expression underwent a rapid, private recalibration. She stayed through lunch, and Decker watched the dynamic between her and Harold with the attention he brought to any human system he was trying to understand. They disagreed about minor things with the ease of a relationship that had been renegotiating the same terms for decades. After lunch, when Harold had gone to let the dogs in, Vera came to stand beside Decker at the sink. "How bad is the knee?" she said quietly. "I don't know," Decker said. "He doesn't mention it?" "He mentioned it to me in September," Vera said. "Then he stopped." "That generally means it got worse," Decker said. "I know," Vera said. She dried a bowl while Decker washed it, two people who had identified the same problem, from different angles. "He won't go to the doctor until someone makes it impossible for him not to." "I'll work on that," Decker said. December brought cold that settled into the county like something that had been waiting at the edge of the property for weeks. Decker replaced caulking on the upstairs windows, painted the exterior frames before the temperatures dropped below 40 for good, and fixed the well pump with a replacement pressure switch he installed in an afternoon. The house was becoming something he could call livable, which was not quite the same as calling it home. He was at Harold's the Thursday before Christmas, when the dark blue pickup appeared. He had driven out midweek because Vera had called to say Harold's knee had swollen overnight, and Harold had told her it was nothing. Decker found Harold at the kitchen table, with the carefully calibrated stillness a man with significant pain adopts when he does not want it visible to others. They had a brief argument about this that Harold lost. Decker drove him to the medical clinic in Hadwick and waited with Bram in the parking lot. The diagnosis was a meniscus that had been unhappy for some time and had finally protested formally, requiring a cortisone injection and a referral and a directive about stairs. Harold received all of this with the expression of a man taking enemy fire in a position he had chosen himself and was too proud to abandon. They were back at the Mill Road house by 4 in the afternoon, Harold moving more easily than he had that morning, when Decker noticed the truck. Dark blue, commercial plates, parked at the end of the Mill Road where the county road met it, engine running. Bram had gone still at the window before either of them said anything about it, just watching. "You know that vehicle?" Decker said. Harold looked at it. "No," he said. The truck was gone by morning, and Decker told himself it was probably a lost driver or someone turning around. He stopped believing this on the 28th of December, when Vera called to tell him a man had come to Harold's door 2 days after Christmas presenting a business card and asking whether Harold had given any thought to selling the Mill Road property. Decker drove out that same day. The business card sat on Harold's kitchen table. Crest Meridian Land Partners, LLC, was printed across it in the subdued font of an organization that had decided understated suggested legitimacy, and below it a name, Philip Tully, Regional Acquisitions Director. "What did you tell him?" Decker said. "I told him the property wasn't for sale," Harold said. "He said he understood and gave me the card in case my situation changed." Harold's jaw was set in the way of a man describing something that had bothered him more than he intended to reveal. "He had a very agreeable smile," Harold added. "The kind that doesn't settle right." Bram, lying by the door with his chin on his forepaws, lifted his head and looked at Harold. Then he looked at Decker. Decker photographed the card with his phone. That evening, he spent 2 hours at his kitchen table, with his laptop going through public records, county filings, land transaction databases, and the corporate registry for Crest Meridian Land Partners, LLC. The company had been registered in Virginia 18 months ago, registered agent a law firm in Richmond. It had completed 7 land acquisitions in 5 counties, 4 of them along what a county planning document described as a proposed routing corridor for a natural gas distribution line currently in permitting review. 3 of those 4 properties had been purchased at prices the assessor's comparables suggested were at market floor. The corridor, as currently proposed, passed within a quarter mile of the eastern boundary of Harold Garrison's 11-acre property on the Mill Road. He sat with that for a while, in the quiet of the kitchen with Bram at his feet and the wind moving through the oaks outside. Then he called Vera Moss. Vera listened without interrupting, which confirmed for Decker that she was a serious person. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment and then said, "He has not told you about the property taxes." The word taxes landed in the conversation like a stone. "He is 18 months behind," Vera continued, her voice tight with the effort of naming something she had been carrying alone. "Dorothy's illness took most of what they had. After she passed, he managed on his repair work. But it has slowed because of the knee, and he has been managing by not telling anyone how he has been managing." A pause. "If someone came to him with a purchase offer right now, even a low one, he might be too proud to admit he needs it." "How much are the back taxes?" Decker said. "Enough that he is worried," Vera said. "I can see it in him even when he won't say it." "All right," Decker said. "I need a few days." He went to the county tax assessor's office in Hadwick on the 30th of December. The balance owed on Harold Garrison's parcel, back taxes, penalties, and interest, was $9,412. A foreclosure timeline was suspended pending a review scheduled for the following March. $9,412 bought Crest Meridian Land Partners, LLC, very little. It was, for a company acquiring parcels along a pipeline corridor, a rounding error. For Harold Garrison, it was a number that had been sitting on his kitchen table every morning for 18 months without being spoken. He called Philip Tully. He called as a private citizen asking questions, the way a man who has spent 2 decades gathering intelligence in difficult places knows how to ask questions without revealing their purpose. Tully was smooth and practiced and gave him very little useful information, while appearing to give him a great deal. He had the voice of a man whose presentation had become reflexive, and beneath the practiced ease of it there was a slight calculation in the pauses, a cost-benefit assessment running on a separate thread from the words. Decker recognized this. He had spent time around people for whom every conversation was a transaction. After the call, he made a second one, to June Parr at the hardware store. June Parr was not simply the woman who ran the hardware store. She was the woman who had run it for 30 years, which in a county of this size meant she was the woman who knew which contractors had done honest work and which had not, which properties were positioned to attract outside interest, and which landowners were being worked. She listened to what Decker told her with the focused attention of someone who had been expecting something like this. "Philip Tully has been through here before," she said. "Not him personally. People like him. They come through every time there is a development proposal and they work the edges. The people who are land-rich and cash-poor. The people who are tired or scared or both." "Harold is both," Decker said. "Tired and scared. He just doesn't show it." "I know," June said. "What do you need?" He told her. What followed in the first 2 weeks of January did not look like much from the outside. A series of conversations between people who knew each other, some paperwork gathered and reviewed. but which had from the inside the quality of a community remembering what it was capable of. June Parr talked to Carl Briggs at the Feed and Farm Supply, a broad, careful man who had known Harold by reputation longer than by acquaintance, and who listened to what June told him with the expression of someone who had been waiting for a reason to act. Carl called his cousin Manny Briggs, who had been Harold's neighbor before the family moved 20 years ago and who had never entirely forgiven himself for leaving. Manny made the call from his kitchen in Hadwick at 9 in the evening, and his voice on the phone, as Vera learned later, had carried the unmistakable quality of relief. Manny called a man named Terence Overholt, who had done mill work alongside Harold for 6 years in the late 80s, and who had been wondering about him for some time, in the way that people wonder about old friends they have not called and cannot entirely justify not calling. Vera Mossy called 2 members of the congregation at Harding Community Church who had known Dorothy and who had, after her death, felt uncertain about how to help Harold without making him feel diminished, and who were relieved to have a practical channel for the impulse. A retired county surveyor named Bill Aiken, who drank coffee at the diner every weekday morning and had been following the pipeline project with professional interest, agreed to review the documents Decker had collected. Aiken was a compact, white-haired man of 67 who spoke in the measured cadence of someone long accustomed to precision, and when Decker laid the documents on the diner table, Aiken put on his reading glasses and went through them without interruption, pausing twice to make a notation in a small spiral notebook he produced from his shirt pocket. Bill Aiken's assessment was Direct's, Crest Meridian Land Partners, L. LC had filed the right paperwork in the right sequence to create the appearance of inevitability around the pipeline corridor while the actual route was still in permitting, and had 3 viable alternatives that had not been publicly evaluated. The appearance of inevitability was the mechanism. It was designed to make property owners feel that resistance was futile, that accepting a below-market offer now was preferable to a condemnation proceeding later. The permits are not final, Aiken told Decker over coffee on the second Wednesday of January. They won't be for 6 months minimum, and 2 alternative routes are significantly cheaper to build. If anyone files comment with the State Energy Office referencing the alternatives, the whole thing slows down considerably. Would you write that up? Decker said. I have been waiting for someone to ask me to, Aiken said. The comment filing went in on January 15th, under Aiken's name and supported by documentation that Decker and Vera had assembled over a week of evenings. Decker did not tell Harold about this until it was filed. Harold's knowledge of the effort would change the effort, would make him feel indebted in a way that would be bad for him. And the right time for Harold to know was after the mechanism was visible, not before. He told him on the evening of the 17th. They were in Harold's kitchen, the 2 of them and Vera, with the dogs in the yard and the winter dark coming down outside. Decker put the printed copy of the filing on the table and let Harold read it. Harold read it slowly, with the deliberate pace of a man for whom written information required full attention. And when he finished, he set it down and looked at the table. His hands were still. You've been working on this for weeks, Harold said. Yes, Decker said. Without telling me? Yes. Harold looked up. His eyes held something complicated. The internal weather of a proud man who has been helped against his will and has found, arriving on the far side of it, that he is grateful rather than humiliated. The taxes, Harold said. Decker explained what he had found at the assessor's office, the amount, the timeline, the March review, without cushioning it. Harold was quiet for a long time. $9,412, he said, and the words had in them both the pride of someone who had been managing and the exhaustion of managing alone for too long. Vera put her hand on his arm without ceremony, and Harold covered her hand with his. "There is a community fund at the church," Vera said quietly. "Dorothy paid into it for years. It exists for exactly this kind of situation. For families with land and history in this county who are going through something hard. You are not taking charity. You are accepting what your own community built to hold each other up." Harold was quiet for another long moment. Outside, Bram's bark came from the yard, a single sharp sound, and then Hector's lower answering sound, and whatever they had been alerting to was apparently resolved. "All right," Harold said. The word was small, and it cost him something, and it was the right word. Philip Tully called Harold's number in the last week of January. The State Energy Office had by then acknowledged receipt of the comment filing and opened a formal evaluation of the alternative routes. Tully was still polite on the call, polished and agreeable in the manner of a man whose situation was not yet entirely clear to him. Harold told him the property was not for sale and thanked him for his interest and kept the call under 3 minutes. He told Decker about it on Saturday with the dry precision of a man recounting an encounter that had gone exactly as planned. Pastor Ed Morse of Harding Community Church delivered a bank draft to Harold in person one Sunday afternoon in February, $8,000 from the community fund, with the no-nonsense grace of a man who understood that certain kinds of giving were best delivered plainly. The remaining $1,200 Harold paid from his own savings, and Decker drove him to Hadwick to make the payment in person, and Harold shook Sandra, the clerk's hand, afterward with the deliberate formality of a man who had completed a hard thing and wanted the completion witnessed. Manny Briggs appeared one Saturday morning in February with a flatbed trailer and 2 neighbors from Hadwick, and without announcement they spent the day patching the barn roof where sections of metal roofing had lifted in the winter storms. Harold worked alongside them, knee brace visible below his canvas pants, and said less than 20 words through the whole day. When the work was done, and the men were saying their goodbyes in the driveway, Harold shook each hand with the full attention grip of a man who understood that this kind of afternoon was not about the barn roof. Terence Overholt drove in from the county seat one Sunday, and he and Harold sat at the kitchen table for 4 hours, talking their way back through 30 years of shared history and arriving somewhere good. The State Energy Office issued preliminary findings in the first week of March. 2 alternative routes were significantly cheaper to develop and presented fewer private property complications. A formal reevaluation period of 90 days was opened. Crest, Meridian Land Partners, LLC, did not call the Mill Road House again. Spring came to Harding County reluctantly, and then all at once, the tree line on Piney Church Road going from bare to furred with green over 2 warm weeks in April, the oaks his mother had planted filling out their enormous canopies until the house was properly shaded. Decker planted a kitchen garden in the cleared ground south of the house, tomatoes and beans and squash, because it seemed like the kind of thing a person did when they were staying somewhere, and because the soil was good, and it seemed wasteful not to use it. He had dinner at the Mill Road House most Saturdays now, and Vera Mossa joined them most of the time, and occasionally Carl Briggs or Bill Aiken appeared, drawn by whatever informal network had formed around the table of a man who cooked well and kept his door open. The kitchen that had been spare and too quiet for one person was, on those evenings, full in the way kitchens are meant to be full. Harold's knee had improved significantly under a physical therapy regimen he undertook with the same careful compliance he brought to everything worth doing. And he had taken on 2 cabinet commissions from people in Hadwick who had learned, through whatever channels these things traveled, that there was a millwright on the mill road who still knew what dovetail joinery was supposed to look like. The State Energy Office finalized its route revision in June. The pipeline corridor was redirected 9 miles to the south, requiring no private farmland acquisition. Crest Meridian Land Partners, LLC, updated their corporate filing to reflect a change of focus toward another county, and Philip Tully's number went to a generic voicemail recording with no name. On a Saturday morning in late June, Harold appeared at the door of the barn where Decker was helping sand the second cabinet commission, a cherry wood cabinet with hand-cut dovetails that Harold had been working on for 3 weeks and which was, by any reasonable standard, beautiful work. Harold set 2 cups of coffee on the workbench without comment and went to the barn door and stood there looking out at the yard. The morning was warm and still, the kind of June morning in Virginia that arrives like a promise finally kept after a long winter of broken ones. The cedar trees at the back of the property were deep green and motionless. Hector was on the horse blanket in the corner, graying chin on his forepaws, watching Harold with the patient attention of an old dog who has decided his person is the most interesting thing in any room. Bram was at the far edge of the property, nose to the ground in the cedar scrub, his tan and black coat catching the morning light in the specific way it did on days when he was working entirely for the pleasure of it. "I have been thinking about what I told you," Harold said, "about the people who notice you." "I remember it," Decker said. Harold turned around. "Dorothy had a gift for it," he said. She could walk into a room and find the person who most needed to be seen, and she would go directly to them. He was looking at Decker with those faded blue eyes, quiet and direct. "You are like that. You have the same thing. You don't know it because it doesn't feel like a gift to you. It feels like something you can't turn off. It is what brought you here, and it is what kept you here. And I want you to know that I see it." Decker stood with his hands on the sanding block and said nothing. "Your mother raised someone very good," Harold said. That was the sentence that finally did it, that opened the thing Decker had been keeping carefully closed since he drove back to Harding County with nowhere else to be, since he stood at his mother's grave in the November mud and felt the particular devastating silence of a place that had needed him and had managed without him, and was now asking nothing because it was too late to ask. He did not cry. He was not a man who cried in front of other people, but he set down the sanding block and turned and looked at the barn wall for a moment, and Harold Garrison said nothing, and the barn was quiet. And outside in the June morning, Bram came back from the cedar scrub and found Hector in the yard and pressed his shoulder against the old dog's side, and that was that. "I've been thinking," Decker said after a moment, "about putting in a wood stove at the Piney Church house. The electric heat is running up the bills, and the fireplace draw is poor." "The masonry on that chimney is probably original," Harold said, with the tone of a man engaging with a structural problem. "You'll want to have it swept before you do anything." "I know a sweep in Hadwick," Decker said. "You're going to be here a while, then," Harold said. This was not quite a question. Bram and Hector were visible at the edge of the yard, lying in the thin morning sun, Hector's graying chin on his forepaws and Bram's shoulder pressed against his side, both of them still and absolutely at ease in this particular piece of the world. "I think so," Decker said. "Some things you come back for, and some things come back for you. And after a long time apart, you discover there is very little difference between them. A dog leads you to a door leads you to a table leads you back to the people who have been keeping your name in their hearts since before you knew you needed them to." Harold Garrison did not own Hector. Hector, in the way of all dogs worth anything, belonged to exactly the place and the person he had chosen, and had been choosing year after quiet year. A Marine and his German shepherd could drive every road in a county and read every threat correctly and still not see, until the right morning in the right barn with the right man speaking the right sentence, that they were already home. What Decker found on the mill road was not what he went looking for. It never is. He went looking for the owner of a lost dog and found the thing he had been circling for 14 months without daring to approach directly. The particular, stubborn human miracle of being known by someone and deciding, at last, not to leave. If you have someone in your life who sees you the way Harold Garrison described, the way Dorothy Garrison lived, hold that person close. What they carry for you is not nothing, it is everything. May you find, in the places you have been avoiding, the thing that has been waiting for you there. May you have the courage to stay when staying is hard, and the grace to receive what the people around you have been trying to give you. May God bless you and your family, and keep all of you, and bring you home.